Well, folks, this is Pat Barron, your guest host on Radio Free Market, talking with Kevin Williamson. And Kevin, what I'd like to get back to now in this, our longest segment, is talk more about, well, things are really getting to where the government's not going to be able to meet all its obligations. So what kind of things should the citizens of our country and really citizens of the world try to work toward to make sure that the new institutions we set up are more sustainable and more freedom-oriented? So why don't you take that ball and run with it?
Well, what we can do, first of all, is count on something that I have a great deal of faith in, and that is the fact that people don't want to be poor, miserable, hungry, and vulnerable. People want to lead materially comfortable lives for the most part. I mean, there's the occasional fanatic out there who doesn't, but people for the most part want to be fat and happy and peaceful and work and own a home and raise their families. And people are really good at doing that sort of thing for the most part if left alone. People tend to do a really good job at managing their own lives and a really bad job at managing other people's lives. So we've got, historically, precedents and models for helping people to evolve arrangements that will solve problems for them. You can remember, I'm sure, within your lifetime and certainly within my lifetime, back when banking was something you had to pay for. You had to pay the bank to open a checking account. Now the bank pays you. You can remember a time, and not that long ago, when I was maybe in junior high in the middle 1980s, when a cellular phone was the size of a cinder block, and it cost $10,000, and it worked for about 4 minutes. Now, there's a reason that our cell phones right now are a lot better than those were, and that everybody has one. They're cheap. They give them away for free. Service costs, basically nothing. You can get it from $20 a month, for the cost of 5 cups of coffee, essentially 6 cups of coffee if you go someplace cheaper than Starbucks. These things keep getting better and better, and it's not just that technology somehow improves itself over time. It's not really even primarily a technological question. Most of the raw technology that was necessary to make something like an iPhone exist was available years and years ago. It was really a financial process that made it available widespread, and that made it a great market product. So what happens is that every year our cars get better, our phones get better, our computers get better, they get cheaper. There are features, they do things that no one would have even dreamed about 20 years ago. Our entertainment gets better. All the stuff that's delivered through the competitive marketplace gets better and cheaper every year. The things that don't get better and cheaper are the things that are being delivered through the state, which is national defense, public schools, health care, which even before Obamacare was half run by the government and heavily regulated, and then a lot of very regulated government-involved sectors tend to be defective in the economy too. Things like finance and banking, which something about where the regulations create a lot of sort of perverse incentives and cause the markets not to work as well as they do. Insurance is another example of that. So it's really difficult to say in advance what an institution would look like, a particular institution. What would healthcare look like in a totally free society? What would the enforcement of contracts look like in a totally free society? It's difficult to say for the same reason that it would be difficult to say, looking at a Model A Ford in 1920, what a modern car would look like, what a Prius would look like, or something like that. But you do know how to lay the ground to let people innovate to create these things, which the number one thing, of course, is get the government out of the way. The second thing is to allow a great deal of social, political, legal latitude for people to innovate and form cooperative arrangements. Homeschooling is a good example of this. The homeschoolers are great. They're my favorite sort of radical movement in the country because they don't even think of themselves that way, but they really are. Where they're saying, fine, you can take our tax dollars. We'll still pay into the stupid government school system, but you're not getting our kids. We're going to educate them ourselves. We'll do it ourselves directly. And the homeschoolers have come up with all these great cooperative arrangements where they have commercially developed curricula for people who maybe have expertise in one area but not in another. Not everybody knows everything that they need to teach their kids, and so they can go to the marketplace and find materials and textbooks and programs and things like that work. They've got all sorts of wonderful institutions and arrangements they developed on their own, and they could be doing more of it, but we do still get in their way a lot. The government still does not, they really dislike homeschoolers. I wrote a piece a couple of months ago where there was this law professor. I forget where she was from, one of the better schools, and she was just apoplectic that these people should be allowed to educate their own children. I mean, how can we allow such a thing? Why isn't the government running this? And of course, where I teach over the King's College, half of my students or maybe more are homeschooled, and they tend to be better educated. They tend to be better adjusted socially. They tend to be in almost every way better off and better put together than their public school counterparts. So, the schools do a lot of damage to kids in addition to wasting a lot of money. And we should, make more room for things like that. We should make more room for people to come up with innovative, cooperative ways to fund health care for themselves and for people who can't afford it. We should certainly allow people to do much more in the realm of charity than they do. The situation we had in New York State where Catholic Family Services was chased out of the adoption business basically because they wouldn't serve same-sex couples. That sort of thing is it's a net loss for society. I mean, there's no reason that somebody couldn't set up a competing adoption agency. There's no law against providing adoption services to same-sex couples, but the Catholic Church just chooses not to do it for its own religious and moral reasons, which is fine. But, we aren't willing to say live and let live in a situation like that. We're not willing to say, okay, you've got your way of doing things. Someone else may have a different way of doing things. Let the Episcopalians handle the same-sex adoptions, right? But nobody is really willing to do that. And we need to make more room for people, a greater platform for innovation so we can apply the same sorts of forces and techniques that have made life materially so much better in so many ways to the one remaining realm where it hasn't really improved in the last 100 years, which is government.
Yeah, and it seems like the key ingredient here is just the simple idea of freedom. Give people the freedom to do what they wish. Good friend of mine, Dr. Patrick Burke. Do you know Patrick?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Oh sure. Patrick Burke wrote a book. It's now maybe 10, 15 years ago, but it's still worth reading. It's called No Harm.
Yeah.
And his thesis was that people should be allowed to do anything they want as long as they don't harm anyone else. And by harm, he means physical harm. So the fact that, I decide to buy my car from Japan and not from Detroit, I have not harmed the Detroit auto workers because I did that. That's kind of one of the ways that many of these ideas. Another one that he really takes issue with is the idea of discrimination, how that has been used and perverted to reduce our freedom. But, free people doing no harm can do all kinds of things.
They can. And, here's what I think about that. I've got a slightly more complicated take on that. The harm principle is, as we call in the libertarian world, the idea of positive rights. You can't have your right to life, liberty, property truncated by somebody, whether a private party or state, is a really great and useful principle, but it is a political principle. It's a question of how do we model government. And yes, that's how I want government to be modeled. If we're going to have a state that gets involved in our lives, where I want it to get involved is to get involved to protect us from having our rights violated by people, to protect us from harm. That's the job of government. If government has a job, it's to protect life, liberty, and property, right? But that is not, I think, an adequate governing principle for a broader society. It's a really good principle for how you run your government, but there's a lot more to a healthy society than what its government is shaped like. And I think, and I have long thought, that we have a positive moral obligation to help the poor, the defenseless, the vulnerable, the sick, the homeless, and all the rest of it. The truth is we can do a lot better job of doing that outside of the welfare state. We can apply much more effective models for helping people who, for whatever reason, cannot help themselves than we can through the state. And the public schools are a mess. They serve almost nobody very well. We can do a better job educating kids who don't have the resources to get a good education on their own outside of the public school system than we can inside it. The public housing projects are a mess. We can do a much better job, voucherizing and doing other sorts of approaches to housing for the homeless and other people who are economically marginal than we can through the federal government trying to run it. Healthcare, is there anything worse than Medicaid? I mean, is there a worse run program in the country than Medicaid? I can't think of one. We can do a lot better for people on almost every axis that you would want to try to improve the lives of people who need some help from their neighbors. You can do it better outside the state than you can inside the state. So, I sometimes resist this kind of, you get this with the RAND people a lot, this idea that the harm principle is the only moral principle, which I don't think is correct, and I don't think it's a good way to present the case, and I don't think it's a good way to organize a society, but I think it's a really good principle for limiting what governments are allowed to do. But we can do a lot more than that, and we should do a lot more than that, because, even in the Nozikian utopia, there are going to be people who cannot provide for themselves. I mean, there are going to be people who are disabled, people who are mentally disabled, people who have mental disorders, people who have other sorts of problems, they're going to be children, right? They're going to be people who can't help themselves. And we as libertarians need to do, I think, a better job of outlining, our counter institutions, of what we want to do for these people instead of the welfare state. One, because it's politically necessary to do so, because you can't beat something with nothing. But secondly, because we really need to do the hard work of thinking through what our institutions are going to look like. And that's part of what I'm trying to get to in this book, is saying, well, it's hard to predict exactly what an institution will look like, but you can certainly lay the ground and say, well, here's some options, here's some things we've done in the past, here's some things we could do in the future. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is that if you really want to see what people are capable of in terms of innovation when they're not being bothered too much by their government, look what criminals are up to. Because criminals are the people who are far, far outside of the system, and they're usually involved in, bad, harmful, destructive, antisocial activities of various kinds. They do, also engage in some really useful innovation. Use of things like advanced privacy technology is something that really grew up more in the criminal underworld than it did in the business community, and something I'm writing about a good deal, which is the privatization of currency. The criminal world already essentially has private currency. They've got various ways of doing it. They use prepaid gift cards. They use commodities like cocaine and other sorts of things. There are electronic exchanges where people buy and sell things like frequent flyer miles and points in rewards programs and things like that. And it turns out that these are every bit as fungible as government-issued currencies. They are, if anything, a better store of value because they don't really suffer from inflation all that much. And the problem is there's really high transaction costs. By which I mean it's difficult to use them. It costs you money to get involved in a system like that. Now, our government has been fighting like hell when people like Liberty Dollars and other firms have tried to issue competing currencies, and they're charging them with counterfeiting, which is just ridiculous. They're not counterfeiting. They're not making fake dollars. They're trying to make better dollars. But the truth is you're going to see innovation, particularly in the field of currencies, I think, in the very near future. The question is, will it happen in the United States? Will it happen somewhere else? Singapore has already, very aggressive laws about banking privacy and financial privacy, things like that. They're the sort of country that might be inclined to let people do some innovation in terms of issuing banknotes, currencies, things like that, because they'd like to profit from it, because they want to be the world's financial center. They want Singapore to be what City of London once was, and Wall Street arguably still is, but is becoming less and less of every day, which is the world's financial capital.
I just had an interesting thought of an anecdote I can talk to you about, where the only country I was ever in that you could go into a shop and the shop would take any currency from any country in the world, any currency, and it was a country that I believe was run by a criminal organization. It was the Soviet Union.
Yeah, anything but a ruble, right?
Right, anything but a ruble. In fact, in the Soviet Union, I was over there, actually when I was in the Air Force, and they had Berioska shops, they called them. You had to have a foreign passport to enter them, so much for the classless society. The ordinary poor Russian people could not walk into these places. And they were the only place that had anything that was even resembled any kind of a nice souvenir that you would want to bring back, maybe a musical instrument or some kind of woodworking of some kind. But they had price. Everything was prices in every item was in 20 currencies. And didn't matter what you had, they took it.
Yeah,
now, try doing that in the United States.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, of course, part of that is the dollar still is worth a little bit more than it was. It's still a real currency, although it's becoming less than one every day. But yeah, I'm not saying I don't endorse these sorts of criminal activities, but you can learn a lot about what the world is doing by looking at what the criminals are doing, and the way they innovate. There's a great deal of social innovation out there, but do we want to limit it to drug dealers and human traffickers and other sorts of horrible human beings, or do we want to set people a little bit more free and let people with good intentions and the intention to create social value and to create better lives and better prosperity for people innovate as well? Particularly when it comes to things like education and healthcare. I mean, these are so important. Education, really shapes someone's trajectory in life. I was tremendously lucky that I went to good schools and got sort of put on the right course, but that doesn't happen for a lot of people, and we could certainly make it happen for a lot more people than it does. It's education at the beginning of your life and healthcare at the end of your life. In the middle, you can kind of take care of yourself pretty much, but we really could do a lot more on those things than we do.
Yeah. You're talking about, how can we provide better for, people through a private sector. And I believe, Ludwig von Mises and most of the big Austrians have always emphasized that the greatest anti-poverty program that ever existed is a thing called capitalism.
Yeah, a job.
And, a job, capitalism. And capitalism drives the price of essential services down, and so you become wealthier, you eat better, you are better clothed and fed and taken care of in all kinds of different ways. And then those who still fall through the cracks through either no fault of their own or through weakness of character, there is more capital in the country to take care of those people. Now, I've got an example right here in Iowa City, where I'm working part-time teaching at the University of Iowa here. My wife works at the big hospital, the University Hospital, and the Carver family are just such benefactors to that university. There's the Carver Cancer Center. There's the Carver this. My wife told me just a couple months ago that the Carvers came in and gave millions and millions of more dollars to the University Hospital. Now, you have to think, I don't really know who the Carvers are, but they could go out and buy an island in the Aegean Sea, I guess. They could go buy a yacht. They could have there's unlimited want. But what they want to do is build a cancer center for people. It's just it warms your heart.
Yeah, it does. Here in New York, every good thing was built by a robber baron, from the universities to the libraries.
Well, folks, we're coming to the end of this segment, so stay right with us. We'll be back for another short segment after these messages, so hang in there. So, folks, welcome back. This is Pat Barron, your guest host for Radio Free Market, and our guest today is Kevin Williamson. And Kevin, I would like to get back to a subject that we talked a little bit on in the last longer segment, which is money. And it appears to me that the breakdown of big government is being we are observing it the most in the breakdown of money. And I wondered if you'd just care to expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, two things you're seeing. One is in the Eurozone. You're seeing the decay of government monopoly currencies accelerated because they've got a single currency. What you had over the course of the years before that was individual countries would get into trouble, their currencies would depreciate, they would default, they would do whatever happened at that time. And they'd take a beating and they would get it built back over the years. But since the creation of the Eurozone, everybody's got the same currency, and so they've all got to fail together now. So it's making their collective insolvency much more obvious in a very actually efficient kind of way. So we can maybe thank the Europeans for doing that. And what's happening in the United States is largely the same thing, where you've got the federal government, in a sense, backstopping these insolvent states and municipalities in its own insolvent ways. And you've got the Fed buying right now all of the debt the Treasury is issuing to the tune of $100 billion a month or whatever it is. But one of these days they're going to have to stop doing that, and we'll find out then whether the markets really believe that much in the dollar, whether they don't. Libertarians always make a big thing about the government's monopoly on violence, the use of force, which is an important point. But another thing that's been hugely important in the last 100 years is the government's monopoly on money. Money is the fundamental piece of financial technology. There's nothing else that we would ever use that we'd allow the government to have that kind of monopoly on. We wouldn't let them have a monopoly on cars or cell phones or banking or anything else, but we let them have a monopoly on money. And I suspect that once the government has to really start competing in that marketplace, that it will, by its own reaction to normal competitive market forces, become smaller, more effective, more efficient. It will start to limit itself to the things that it's actually there to do, and stop trying to do things like run the overseas private insurance corporation and bases in 50 countries and all the other stuff that we do in terms of governmental overreach. So that's going to be a key innovation, I think, and I think that the end of the government's monopoly on money is coming very soon. Well, actually, it's already here. I mean, that's what the gold rally is all about. It's people saying we no longer believe in the dollar. We no longer have faith in government-issued currencies. We're putting our money into commodities and other sorts of things. I mean, there's a reason that every commodity price in the world's at or near a record high right now, and it's not because there's a shortage of wheat or cotton or gold. It's because no one believes in government-issued currencies anymore.
I think that the key thing there is that wheat, cotton, gold, silver, they are all commodities that cannot be manufactured with the stroke of a pen,
right,
or the click of a keyboard.
Doesn't even take a pen stroke. They don't even have to print dollars anymore. At least used to, they had to go down to the Bureau of Printing and Engraving and do some real work. Now they just send out an email, and there's a $1 trillion in new liquidity on the marketplace.
Yeah.
So that's going to be one of the things that really contributes to the crisis. It's going to give us a chance to evolve. Is the fact that governments no longer not only have no control over their finances, but they really don't have control over their money anymore. And you can't just print money to inflate your debt away when you're actually still running a deficit, because interest rates will stop you from doing that.
Right. You just destroy the dollar. Well, Kevin, I tell you, this has been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you for being our guest today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, I look forward to your book that comes out next month, which is The Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism. I'll make sure that I get that, and we'll put that on the Radio Free Market website as recommending that to our listeners. And I'll look forward to your big book, whatever it may be named. The provisional title right now is After Leviathan. So that's going to be, I'll really look forward to that. So, folks, this is your guest host, Pat Barron, sitting in for Michael McKay at Radio Free Market. We're on the web at radiofreemarket.com, where you can subscribe to us for free and listen to our shows on iTunes or visit our archives for easy download. So until next week, wherever you are, please stand up for freedom. So long.